automation is the name of the game. Like if you're not decide, you're making a conscious choice not to automate. You're decidedly going to have a kind of a come to Jesus moment in which you realize you need to do this and adopt it because just the demand for it is your customers are going to push in that direction.
Welcome, everyone, to the Tech Business Roundtable podcast show. This is a podcast show dedicated to shining a spotlight on tech innovators, entrepreneurs, founders, and the compelling narratives behind the movements they've established. I'm your host, Ryan Davies, and I'm hosting today's discussion, Unleashing Innovation and Navigating the Fintech Frontier, a deep dive into entrepreneurship with Andres Klaric. How'd I do?
You did great.
There we
Thanks,
go.
man.
A little bit about Andres for our listeners here. After growing up in Bolivia, he saw some pretty clear divides in wealth and opportunity, and that inspired him to bring about a change, starting with addressing Bolivia's healthcare system issues in high school. After studying at the University of Pennsylvania, it opened his eyes further, and he dove into the world of finance, working with some absolute behemoth giants like Goldman Sachs and Credit Suisse. He learned about global finance and has always been picturing, keeping in mind the bigger picture. After Harvard Business School, he defined his direction even a little bit more, and the need for purpose in business really became his personal philosophy. After transitioning to a couple of different capital groups to work with, he built Fuse Finance. And as the CEO and founder of Fuse, he is building the future of loan originations and how to reshape finance. Andres, anything I missed there to add to that? I see also that you've got a big a Formula One love affair. So are you following it in Vegas this weekend?
Yeah, I have family in Vegas. My sister is actually there for the race, so
Oh,
yeah,
amazing.
she
I
was
mean,
sending me a couple of pictures of her at a golf course, and she actually got to see some of the drivers and some actual pros, golf pros, playing with alongside with them. So
incredible.
she's having a hell of a week. I will just watch from the comfort of home this time.
Gonna say you get the pageantry of Vegas with the or the stage of Vegas and the pageantry of F1. You put those together, it's going to be incredible. But we'll try and live up to that here today with some pageantry and some fun here on this episode as well. But I kind of want to dive in with you a little bit here about your background and again growing up in Bolivia. How you kind of saw and see now the financial system and what's led you to this path.
For me, like from an early age, I mean, Bolivia, like in the 80s, underwent what was called, like at that time, shock therapy, right? Like we had hyperinflation, so and the government had to do plenty of things, right? Banks were going bankrupt. So I grew up with parents that had lived that, and I kind of grew up with that experience of like seeing bank runs, that kind of stuff. So I saw a pretty unstable banking system, came to America and saw the same thing kind of at a much more global effect, like seeing the '08 crisis unfold and like how that scars you as a teenager, early 20s guy, kind of seeing that sort of crisis unfold and like pretty much like questioning what's going to happen with the system. Conversely, I also see financial institutions as huge catalysts for growth and like they're the engines of our economy. Because by virtue of facilitating credit or like money movement, like just things get done, right? And being the son of immigrants, I remember from the early age too, like going to the bank to pick up the money that like one of your relatives had sent you and things like that. That you always see banks, finance institutions as like agents for change, and actually not necessarily the way that sometimes they get depicted in the media as complete negatives. I always saw them as like this wonderful place where you could get a loan, you could get money, you could put the money that you earn through the day. So when the opportunity came up to be part of the system, and also now at Fuse change it and make it even more efficient, I always thought that like the mission really aligned with like that kind of DNA that and relationship that I had established financial institutions as a whole.
That's amazing. I mean, that's a great inspiration story, right? Of kind of what got you here to start your own company, not like to expand off of what you were doing and do this with Fuse particularly. What kind of unique value do you believe that you bring to the market from that perspective, and how have you been able to do so?
Yeah, at a macro level, there's like the mission and the vision. I think like the utility that you bring to the lenders, the value proposition is quite simple. It's you become much more digitally native. You allow them to like access tech tools that today like they need to pretty much stand in line to get from their current providers or vendors. Second is we are facilitating the interaction between technical teams and non-technical teams, meaning engineers do not need to do any more things that are just kind of less hot changes, less things that like kind of annoy them and distract them from bigger strategy type of goals. And that business teams can do stuff that today was left kind of in the zeros and ones type of world, right? Like the coding world. They do not need to code changes. They can do rate changes, change underwriting tools, and do it in something that it visualizes and looks much more like an Excel or decision trees that they understand, versus kind of that world that was far removed from them. That was the coding world, right? Via low code, no code tools. And last but not least, the third thing we give them is dashboards, meaning like whatever they see on their day-to-day basis reflects their nature, seniority, and like kind of responsibilities of the role, and not just a kitchen sink that it's very difficult to understand with the multiple tabs. It's more like, hey, if your job is to do XYZ, then like your screen should just be XYZ. It shouldn't be like all the ABC or all the alphabet of things they needed to do. So that's kind of like what the value prop for the lenders. I think what inspires me as a founder, kind of like my ulterior motive, so to speak, is I want to help lenders reduce their cost of operations. If you reduce the cost of operations and turn them into much more efficient machines, ultimately that means that that lender is going to have the possibility of issuing more loans. If they issue more loans, like that business owner that today is being denied is going to be said yes. That student is going to get that student loan to go to college. So like that and a more efficient lender translates into more loans for folks. More folks means like more of that flywheel into the economy.
And you touched on this there already about how this is a really rapidly changing and ever evolving landscape, right? Like it goes from, as you said, where you had to be in line, still do a lot of face-to-face stuff, and quickly it's evolving into automation, into some things that you can create efficiencies for. Can you share some insights on the importance of being able to adapt to these technological advancements and staying ahead of that curve in fintech, and how you've been able to do so?
Absolutely, like the fintech, especially like the newcomer startups, like do not have the kind of they have their weaknesses, they have their strengths. They can move faster, right? They do not have a branch network that they are going to cannibalize, right? Or at least that's not at top of mind. They don't need to think about, hey, if I bring everyone, what am I going to do with my physical footprint, right? And banks conversely have that physical footprint that like, hey, you actually have an advantage of being top of mind for that particular borrower or banking customer, that like they go a couple times a year stop with you, but like you're asking them to fill out the very cumbersome forms, right? Like why don't you make that human interaction that you're having much more meaningful, right? Reduce keystrokes, things like that, and like help them turn what today is perceived as a cost or like a perceived like weakness as an actual strength, right? Humans, we still like strive, we love interacting with humans. So like make that branch interaction much better if you're a more established player. If you're a fintech, it's how do you actually like even make your current competitive advantage even stronger, right? Like how do you approve people faster? How do you actually delight customers? How do you connect to better capital sources? So like if you're just lending to prime borrowers, why not expand into subprime borrowers where you're just starting a parallel partnership with another lender that you connect through Fuse? Like all those two like value props apply across the spectrum, but the overall narrative here is that automation is the name of the game. Like if you're not decide you're making a conscious choice not to automate, you're decidedly going to have a kind of a come to Jesus moment in which you realize you need to do this and adopt it, because just the demand for it is your customers are going to push in that direction.
Right. Yeah. And I guess that's just the level of expectation and adoption that's coming. With that in mind, though, I mean, I want to ask you, because this has got to be one of the toughest questions and biggest obstacles in fintech, is this is a heavily regulated industry. So
Yeah.
for fintech founders, and in your experience, how have you been able, like, what strategies have you deployed to be able to navigate these regulatory environments while still providing that level of innovation that people crave and want to see?
Yeah. I mean, thankfully, we're not healthcare, but like, it's still heavily regulated, right? So, you need to be compliant with a bunch of specific standards of excellence. So we were lucky that we were able to raise significant amounts of like venture capital funds. So that enabled us to actually like get a lot of those regulatory frameworks, be able to be compliant and all of that, right? That being said, to the audience of founders or potential founders that listen to your show, that should not necessarily be a discouragement in terms of like, hey, there are multiple pieces in the tech stack that lenders utilize that doesn't necessarily require that same level of compliance. Ours needs, because of the type of information that we touch and the type of interactions that we have with the end customer. But to any founder out there doing the research, just that, don't let that be discouraged. And the founders that are looking in this space, hey, like, there's plenty to build in fintech. There are multiple capital providers. If you have a good idea and a good set of proof points, like that should be able to like hopefully allow you to raise some seed or pre-seed money, right? So if you go the route that we did of raising venture capital funds, we've been able to kind of overcome some of those hurdles from a regulatory and compliance standpoint. You still need to keep up. That's kind of like step one of that, right? Then you actually to have a good product. You need to have a real pain point that you're solving, and that pain point is far more important than being like the compliance is table stakes. The solving the pain point is by far the most difficult one, and that's kind of where we're very happy that we see that our product resonates with our customers in terms of helping them automate, helping reduce like the issues with integrations, and like really reducing training time for their employees.
You touched on it in that answer a little bit, so I kind of want to dive down a little bit again because of our audience and what they're most interested in and things like that. But what advice do you have for other entrepreneurs in the fintech space when it comes to things like securing funding and building those strategic partnerships that you've been so successful at doing?
I mean, first and foremost, I think it's ideas are a dime a dozen, but like really, like once you find one, have a framework to get some as much clarity and proof points for it without you necessarily like spending much calories on it. But like, the you always need to create kind of your A, B, C, or D ideas, and at first you're going to kind of uh, explore yourself. You need to the first person you need to convince that your idea is great or good enough is yourself, right? Because the one that is going to put the time, and that's the biggest resource you have, is you, right? So you might as well just get to like a level of conviction and once you get to that level of conviction, to like really put together the equivalent of a CRM in which you say, hey, my idea is to make XYZ thing. And I'm going to check which investors invest in the XYZ of like healthcare or fintech or parallel industries for companies that look a lot to what we're doing, but not necessarily competitors, right? So once you kind of have identified the 50 to 100 funds that like that for which you think your company will be interesting, and you need to have good reasons, not because they are you read on the news that they have money. It needs to be along the lines of like, this fund has invested in this idea that looks very similar but in a different industry. I want to get an introduction to this person. And then once you actually have shortlisted which funds are there, then you need to shortlist to which of these funds I actually have an in, right? Like, hey, Ryan can introduce me to Capital Fund. I'm making up names, right? and Ryan knows me quite well. I'm gonna ask reconnect with him after a couple of months and be like, hey Ryan, can you introduce me to John and Jenny at this fund, right? Like I'm trying to fundraise for this, and they introduce you, and then they kind of like you create that cadence. You of course need to kind of there's an entire playbook to this, right? But you probably want to spend like 4 to 6 weeks just really studying that entire set of customers because you need to see the venture capitalists as your customers too in the very beginning, right? Like they're in the market for good ideas.
Yep.
So you need to sell your idea and kind of expect that like when you're trying to fundraise, it's going to take a couple weeks, if not months, depending on how complex and how much capital you need to raise. But kind of create a time window, right? Like I'm going to raise XYZ capital in this amount of weeks or months and communicate that to the market, have a clear deck. I think Y Combinator does a much better job than I do here in terms of explaining that step-by-step motion and the clarity of thought that you need to put into those presentations. But what I'm sharing here is what we did, right? And we used a lot of Y Combinator's guidance in terms of like how we initiate as a baseline. And of course, then you add based on your personality, like who your co-founder is, just the storytelling component and also where you're based, right? Like if you're in the coastal US, there are way more venture capital funds there. So you can perhaps meet them in person, have coffee. So things like that. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, that was incredible. I mean, I just makes me want to dive into more for another episode where we talk about just that because I think we could do it. But also, you just kind of shared a little bit about, I guess, breadcrumbs of some of the successes or milestones that probably your company achieved without getting into the specifics. But do you have any examples you'd like to share about any successes or milestones that you've achieved and sort of the lessons that came out of that you can share for our listeners?
I mean, for me, like the biggest success is just like facilitating, making it easier for our customers to like really adopt technology, right? So big numbers, right? Like 95% of our reduction in integration time, 80% of tasks being automated, like versus like the baseline of zero. The no training needed, and for the most part, to adopt our dashboards. Those are like the things that we feel proud of. Of course, raising capital is a very happy moment, and we raised over $10 million of capital, but the capital is just the facilitator, right? It's kind of like money doesn't buy happiness, but it helps a lot. Same thing, right? Like the raising money doesn't buy you success, but it gives you a very good shot at really kind of trying to like really executing your vision. So I would say first, what we're doing in terms of customers. Second, I would put it pretty much everything second, but I would in terms of like level of happiness, and I would say at the same level, like just being able to put together a team with an amazing culture that really like strives for excellence to like make our customers satisfied, right? Like that those three elements, if you have them right, the mojo in the organization is excellent, right? There's just they kind of feed off each other and makes you really look forward to Monday if you didn't work on the weekend, or just never have weekends like Sunday scaries. I think I can answer for most of our employees in that. I would say that we love what we do. We really bring our a game all the time, and we're here to win it. And I'd be very proud of what we do if we don't.
I was gonna say you're a founder in fintech and you're in a growing business. You don't get weekends off. You don't get to pretend. You're the guy who works all weekend too. But when you're talking about building that team, how do you approach building and leading a team in the fintech industry? Like, what qualities do you look for when you're hiring for your company?
You want diversity of thought, right? Like, but you want, in terms of like people that are willing to dissent with you, but because they've been thoughtful, not just for the sake of being a contrarian, right?
Yeah.
They actually have that perspective. You want those people that match you with the energy in terms of like hard work and commitment. That people that people that deliver is what you want, right? Like people that are willing to put the hours, but like also work smart. Like it's not necessarily you need to be as for me, if the output and the quality of output, if it takes you 2 hours, it takes you 20. At the end of the day, the output it's what you're probably going to measure on. Effort matters, but like unfortunately, our customers also don't care if we work 2 months or 2 days, and then all they care. So you need to kind of translate that in a compassionate way to your employees, but also kind of have that high standard for everyone else.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it there. For, let's talk a little bit here as we're kind of coming to a close about how you see the future of fintech evolving. You talked about kind of automation and efficiencies being still the focus, I think, but it almost, as you mentioned, it's kind of like table stakes at these days. If you're not doing that, you're going to be a legacy dinosaur. But from the other side of that, are there other emerging trends in fintech that business leaders should be aware of, or are there areas that it's kind of pivoting to, or is it still really all in on that? How can we create more efficiencies and digitize more of the industry?
Yeah, I mean, banking course, they're definitely going to. I mean, there's so much stuff that's still on frame at banks that is definitely going to have its own process of disruption there. I would say like how we even think about payments, right? Just payment rails, the whole notion of cash, right? How has that moved dramatically over the last 20 years? And each one of them is at a show in itself, right? But I could tell you on the lending side, it's just how we actually increase the efficiencies, but we also find ways to create incentives for the people that like regularly will default, that they actually continue to they remain on track, right? So flexibility around lending, all of that is things that I'm pretty excited that what other folks actually innovate around in terms of risk management, that kind of stuff. In the meantime, we're going to help our partners adopt any of that technology so that they don't miss out on whatever happens in payments, whatever happens in risk management. I think from that perspective, we want to be that orchestration layer where all these applications are developed, and we kind of effectively become the operating system of the financial sector.
Amazing. I think that's a good place. We've talked about the past and the present and the future a little bit here, and really help navigate waters for people who are kind of trying or getting into, breaking into, deep into, the fintech area. And I want to leave them with a chance to kind of get to know you a little bit more in terms of where they can find you, where they can learn more about Fuse Finance, and then maybe if there's an opportunity to learn more from you, how they can get in contact.
I think LinkedIn is the best source. I usually try to like get back to people within a week or so if it's been a busy one, or within a day if time allows. I try to put as much content as I can there to help my customers first as my audience. But like if you're a fintech junkie like I am, you probably will find some use on the stuff that we share there and in the page of the company. And if there's more to discuss, I'll be more than happy to set up a call with folks that reach out. Paying it forward is very important. I had people that mentored me through the years, and helping others back. It's the name of the game.
Incredible. We always appreciate when people extend that invitation and are so open and caring to do that. Fusefinance.com is the website, so go check that out as well, and learn a little bit more from what they do as well. Andres, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I know you're a very busy man, and I really appreciate you being able to share some of your thoughts and insights and wisdom around the fintech waters here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it.
So with that, we wrap up another amazing podcast, Unleashing Innovation, Navigating the FinTech Frontier, and a deep dive into entrepreneurship. And I want to thank our listeners. We cannot do what we do without you. So until we meet again with another amazing TBR episode, I'm your host, Ryan Davies. Thanks so much for listening today. Until next time, take care. Thank you.